They walked into that hearing room thinking it would be like every other military briefing, controlled, careful, full of rehearsed answers. But what came out of that room shook Washington to its core. A top general, a man who has spent decades commanding armies, advising presidents, and shaping the most powerful military force the world has ever seen, sat down before a room full of senators and congressmen, raised his right hand, and said something nobody expected, something so raw, so direct, so unlike the polished language of military diplomacy that the entire chamber went quiet. And the silence said everything. This was not a leak. This was not a rumor whispered through back channels. This was a sworn testimony, on record, in front of the world. A general admitting what many feared but nobody in uniform dared to say out loud. Now every military analyst, every defense expert, every foreign policy strategist is scrambling to understand what this means, not just for America, but for the war that is already burning, for the alliances that are already straining, and for the soldiers who are already in the field. Because when a general of this rank breaks from the script, it does not happen by accident. These men are trained from the very beginning of their careers to say exactly what needs to be said and nothing more. Every word is measured. Every sentence is calculated. So when one of them walks into a public hearing and departs from everything that was expected, people listen, people worry. Stay right here, because what this general said, how he said it, and what it means for the war unfolding right now is the most important story you will hear this week. And if you want to stay ahead of the news, make sure you subscribe to this channel because the story is only getting started. The hearing had been scheduled for weeks. On the surface, it looked routine, a standard congressional oversight session, the kind that happens dozens of times a year in Washington, senators asking questions, generals giving answers, the whole thing wrapped up before lunch. But something was different this time. Those who were in that room say the tension was visible from the moment the general took his seat. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who did not sleep well, but the tired of a man carrying something heavy, something that had been sitting on his chest for a long time. And when the questions began, it became clear very quickly that this general had made a decision. Before he even walked through those doors, he was going to tell the truth. Not the diplomatic truth, not the carefully worded, legally reviewed, press office approved version of the truth that Washington is famous for. The real truth, the kind that makes the people in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats, the kind that aides start typing urgent messages about the moment it leaves someone's mouth. The senator who asked the first critical question did not even seem prepared for what came back. The question was straightforward, a question about military readiness, about whether the current strategy on the ground was working. A question that, in any other hearing, would have produced a 10-minute non-answer full of impressive-sounding language that ultimately said nothing. Instead, the general paused, looked directly at the committee, and said, "No, it is not working." And then he kept going. He talked about the gap between what is being reported publicly and what is actually happening on the ground. He talked about the strain on resources, on personnel, on equipment. He talked about decisions being made at the political level that are contradicting what military commanders are advising. He talked about timelines that are not realistic, about expectations that were never grounded in facts. And the room got very, very quiet because a general admitting all of that under oath in public is not a small thing. That is a man putting his career, his legacy, and his reputation on the line. That is a man who decided that the truth was more important than his next promotion. What makes this admission so extraordinary is not just what was said, it is what it reveals about everything that has been happening behind closed doors. For months, the official narrative has been consistent. Progress is being made. The strategy is sound. The military has what it needs. Hold the line. Trust the process. The situation is under control. That has been the message coming from briefings, from press conferences, from carefully worded statements released at carefully chosen times. But behind that message, something else was happening. Military insiders, veterans with deep connections to active service members, defense analysts who speak regularly to people inside the machine, they have been quietly raising alarms for a long time, whispering that the public picture and the private reality were two very different things, that the gap between what was being announced and what was actually unfolding on the ground was growing wider every single week. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it publicly, because in the world of military and government, loyalty to the official position is not just expected, it is enforced. Careers have been ended for less. Reputations have been destroyed for speaking out of turn. The pressure to stay in line, to protect the institution, to never give the enemy or the opposition any ammunition is enormous. And yet this general spoke anyway, which means one of two things. Either the situation on the ground has deteriorated to a point where silence is no longer something a man of conscience can maintain, or this general is carrying a message, a deliberate, calculated signal from within the military establishment that something needs to change, and the normal channels have failed to produce that change. Either way, the implications are staggering, because this is not just about one war in one region. The admission touches on fundamental questions about how America fights, why America fights, and whether the civilian leadership and the military command are actually aligned on what victory looks like. Those are not small questions. Those are the questions that define the direction of a nation, and the answer this general gave under oath in that hearing room suggests that the alignment people assumed existed may not exist at all. That somewhere between the strategy rooms and the battlefield, something has broken down. And it broke down a long time ago. Now the question every serious analyst is asking is simple. What happens next? Because admissions like this do not land quietly. They send shockwaves through the entire system, through the Pentagon, through the White House, through allied governments who have built their own military calculations on the assumption that American strategy is coherent, coordinated, and working. When a top general publicly says it is not, every single one of those governments has to stop and reassess. And they are reassessing right now. Intelligence services around the world, including those of countries that are not friendly to America, will have been studying every word of that testimony. Within hours of it being spoken, they will be looking for weakness. They will be looking for fractures. They will be calculating how this admission changes the battlefield equation. Because in war, information is power, and a general publicly admitting that the strategy is failing is information that every opposing force in every active theater of conflict will use. That is the cost of truth spoken in public. It is necessary, but it is not free. Back in Washington, the political fallout is already beginning. Members of the committee who sat in that room are now being asked to respond. Some are calling for urgent reviews of military strategy. Some are demanding answers from the Secretary of Defense. Some are already using the testimony as political ammunition, framing it around their existing positions on the war, on military spending, on the administration currently in power. But the general himself has not backed down. No clarification has been issued. No spokesperson has come forward to say the remarks were taken out of context or misunderstood. The testimony stands exactly as it was given, and that silence from the general's office is itself a statement. It says, "Those were my words. I meant them, and I am prepared to stand behind them." That kind of resolve from a man of that rank at this moment in history is rare. It is the kind of thing that gets remembered, the kind of thing that shows up years later in history books when people try to understand the turning point, the moment when the official story finally cracked and the real story began to come out. And if you think this is where the story ends, it does not. Because what this general knows, and what he has only partially revealed, goes deeper than anything that has been discussed publicly so far. The deepest part of this story is not the admission itself, it is what the admission points to. Wars are not lost on battlefields alone. History has shown over and over again that the most dangerous failures in war happen long before a single shot is fired. They happen in the planning rooms, in the assumptions made by people sitting far from the front lines, in the political decisions that override military judgment, in the gap between what leaders tell the public and what commanders are actually dealing with on the ground. That gap, the one this general just confirmed exists, is where wars are lost. And the men and women who pay the price for that gap are never the ones sitting in hearing rooms in Washington. They are the ones in uniform, the ones sleeping in forward operating bases, the ones making life and death decisions with equipment that is stretched thin, with orders that do not match the reality they are facing, with a strategy that the very people responsible for executing it no longer believe in. That is what makes this moment so heavy, so significant, so much bigger than one hearing, one general, one day in one committee room. This is a signal, a loud, clear, undeniable signal that something inside the most powerful military establishment in the world is demanding to be heard. That the people who actually understand what war costs, in blood, in treasure, in broken families and shattered futures, are no longer willing to stay quiet while decisions are made by those insulated from those costs. The world is watching. Allies are watching. Adversaries are watching. And the soldiers on the ground, the ones this general spoke for whether he named them or not, they are watching too, waiting to see if the truth that was finally spoken in that room will change anything. Waiting to see if Washington will listen this time. History does not always give second chances. When generals start speaking this way, when the people trained to protect the system from the inside start sounding the alarm from the inside, the window to course correct is open, but it will not stay open forever. The general has spoken. The record has been made. Now the question is whether the people with the power to act will find the courage that he found when he sat down, looked the committee in the eye, and told the truth. That is the story, and it is far from over.